Welcome to Game 5 of the World Championship chess match between Magnus Carlsen and Bd2 Anand. In today's game, should I say, Anand has the white pieces and Carlsen is playing with black. And in this game, Anand starts with his now customary in this match d4, but Carlsen decides to switch out of the orthodox lines of the Queen's Gambit decline that he has been playing so far, and instead goes for the super solid Queen's Indian defense system that has stood the test of time. And within the Queen's Indian defense, this Bishop b4 finesse is becoming increasingly popular as an alternative to either the Bishop a6 lines or the Bishop b7 lines. But the Bishop b4 line is very much still way super solid. White continues with Bishop d2, Bishop e7, Knight c3, Bishop b7, Bishop d2, so Bishop g2, and c6. Now, instead of c6, for instance, the playing castling is more common, and more often than not, black plays the knight to a6. But one could argue that it is an older and slightly less flexible setup, so Magnus goes for the c6 variation. And at this point was where Anand had his first real think of the game, and he sat and he pondered after this move for an entire 6 minutes, which was probably trying to remember some of his own variations in this already slightly offbeat position. But be that as it may, after his 6 minute long think, he pushed the e-pawn. And the game continued with d5, e takes d, c takes d, knight e5, castles, knight c6, c takes d5, knight e5, knight c6, so d6, knight c6, d takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop g5, h6, d5, knight f5. Now in this position, Anand could have gone for d6, queen d8, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, with once again the real possibility of establishing yet another pawn on the 7th rank, as we know exactly how that panned out just a couple of days ago. But be that as it may, in this situation, because the supporting pieces are so far away, that d6 pawn is actually a hell of a lot weaker than what it looks at first glance. But instead of that, Anand went straight for bishop takes f6, queen takes, d takes e6, queen takes e6, which really opens up the central files really nicely. For instance, instead of queen takes e6, Magnus could have played bishop takes g2, e takes f7 check, queen takes f7, king g2, king takes g2, and knight c4, which seems to give some sort of a compensation in the form of pressure down the f-file, as well as some nicely placed pieces. But at the same time, is it really necessary to give up the pawn? So instead, Magnus played the queen takes e6, and here centralizing the rook to e1, queen f6, and in this position Anand sat pondering for 17 minutes, and by the time he played his next move, he was an entire 45 minutes down on the clock, seeming to be barreling towards the time trouble that caused him to have a monumentous blunder in game 2. And after his 17-minute long thing, he played knight d5, and Carlsen must have been unfamiliar with this move, which is practically speaking just an interesting attempt to try and mix up the position a little bit. And White has only maybe a couple of moves that he could possibly play before the game is completely drawn because of the entirely symmetrical pawn structure. And here, for instance, Magnus could have answered with queen takes b2 with rook e2, and then the queen is in a surprising little bit of trouble, and black is forced to play a few extra moves just to secure his queen safety, which will be something like queen a3, rook e3, queen b2, rook b1, queen takes a2, rook a1, queen c4, rook a5, b takes a5, knight e7 check, and White emerges from all of this with 2 pieces for the rook and 2 pawns, but with a shattered structure on the queen side and the lack of targets for black's rooks, it seems that White is already standing better here. So instead of allowing himself to go down that line by playing queen takes b2 immediately, Magnus played bishop takes d5, which then led to bishop takes d5, and then using the pin just to apply a little bit of pressure up the center of the board, rook a d8, and the only way that Anand can keep some sort of pressure up is to play his queen out of the pin and onto the strong diagonal along with his bishop by playing queen f3. And then it's up to Carlsen to now sit and ponder and think whether he wants to accept the sacrificed b pawn and go for a inferior position in the ending, or go for instance, queen takes f3, bishop takes f3, knight c4, b3, knight b6, rook e7, which is without a doubt a much better position for White to be looking at. But how much better than what the position is landed up being is another matter altogether. But it's most certainly not an overly pleasant position to be defending against. So instead of that, Carlsen took the bait and took the sacrificed b pawn, which then led to rook ad1, queen f6, which is a good practical decision because Carlsen sees that the pressure is mounting, and he decides to ruin his own pawn structure in order to be able to simplify everything on the queen side. And obviously Anand plays queen f6, g takes f6, rook e7, but now in the process of ruining his own kingside pawn structure, he obviously manages to give himself a good couple of flight squares for his king to be able to get to. The king goes to g7, rook takes a7, which is a very natural type of move, but perhaps with a little bit more patience, Anand could have set infinitely more problems for Carlsen to be able to deal with. For instance, rook c7 would have been a very interesting type of possibility. And at this point, black really doesn't have any incredibly useful move, and that a pawn is going to be falling sooner rather than later. And so Anand took the a pawn straight away, bearing in mind here already that, as I mentioned earlier, that Carlsen was pushing about, at this moment, about 35 minutes or so ahead on the clock, so Anand needed to be playing a couple of slightly more briskish moves, hence the more natural rook takes a7, in order to prevent him getting into the cataclysmic time trouble that led to his blunder in game 2. And black continues knight c6, rook b7, knight b4, and this is a fairly key point, because now that the knight has gotten to b4, the bishop that is, to all intents and purposes, controlling the vast majority of the board at the moment has to move. And then once the bishop moves, obviously the rooks will be swapped off, and that'll not only will the rooks be swapped off, but it will also leave the pawn at a2 undefended as well. And the game continued with bishop e3, rook takes d1 check, bishop takes d1, and there the a pawn falls, as I was mentioning earlier. Rook takes on b6, which leaves just the 3 versus 3 pawns on the king side, and bishop versus knight ending. And although the black's pawn structure is looking really, really ugly, he's really got nothing to worry about. The bishop is too clumsy to be able to offer any real threat, especially with the king sitting on the dark squares. And the knight, and although the knight is stranded for now, it won't be stranded forever, because it will be able to come bounding back across the board in short succession. Here Carlsen continued with knight c3, as I mentioned, coming bounding across the board, and at the same time applying a little bit of pressure to the bishop that was sitting on b1. White continues with bishop f3, and here black answers with f5, which will do nothing more than give a brilliant outpost of e4 for the knight to be able to land on, which will then effectively cut off white's control of the long h1 a8 diagonal, and effectively, as you can see there, with the trade-off of minor pieces likely to be happening, the game is just barreling straight down towards a rook and pawn completely dead drawn endgame. And the game continued with king g2, rook d8, rook c6, and now the knight comes to e4, which obviously Anand, because that bishop is now totally closed in and the knight has got obviously a lot more scope than what the bishop has, swaps off the bishop, f takes e4, and now we continue with rook c4, f5, g4, rook d2, g takes f5, e3, rook e4, rook takes f2 check, the king goes to g3, and the rook takes on f5. Obviously the very next move will be white obviously mopping up the e-pawn, but without even getting to that, the two players agreed on a draw in this situation, because once that e-pawn drops on the very next move, we've got two rooks versus two rook file on the h file pawns, and it's with the kings in opposition, completely symmetrical. It's a dead draw. So that's where the game ended. So we'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow, and for that matter on Monday as well, because remember that in both games 6 and 7, Magnus Carlsen will have the white pieces on 2 consecutive games, because after the 6th game they reverse their order of colors. So game 6 tomorrow will be Magnus with the white pieces, and game 7 on Monday will be also Magnus with the white pieces. So we'll have to look at how the match develops there. But this 5th game ended in a completely drawn type of situation, which leaves the match after 5 games all square on 2.5 points each. So please feel free to post your comments and questions down below. Share this video out amongst your chess friends. Click that thumbs up like button just below the video screen as well, and also down just below the video screen click that really big nice red subscribe button. That way you'll stay subscribed to my channel and be receiving all of the remainder of the games of this World Chess Championship match immediately after I post each video, which is usually within 2 hours or so of the game ending. Stay carved up for the win. I'll be seeing you next time. Take care. Cheers.